George Brown's Class Clown, and today I'm going to be reading Chapter 2, and let's go! Chapter 2. Hey, Solider, come on in and have some cho. George's dad greeted him as he walked into the house on Saturday afternoon. Cho sounded really good to George. He'd been so busy with his Saturday morning job at Mr. Firstman's pet shop that he'd completely forgotten to eat any of the snacks his mom had put in his backpack that morning. "What are we having?" George asked his dad. "Peanut butter and banana sandwiches," his dad answered. George grinned. He loved peanut butter and banana sandwiches. So did his dad. It was what they always ate when George's mom was working at his craft store and the guy were left on their own. "Come on into the mess hall," George's dad continued. Mess hall was army talk for the place where people eat. George hurried in and took his spot at the table. "Mmm," he said as he took a huge bite of gooey peanut butter and banana on wheat bread. "Bring, bring, bring." Just then, the phone rang. George jumped up to answer it. "Hello?" he said into the receiver. Piece of chewed up bread and banana shot out of his lips. The peanut butter stuck to the roof of his mouth. "George?" Juliana asked. "Is that you?" George swallowed hard. "Yeah, sorry, my mouth was full. What's up?" "Do you feel like going to see the Beaver Brook play tonight?" "I have an extra ticket." George couldn't believe his ears. Beaver Brook's minor league team was amazing. They'd only lost one of their last 10 games. "Would I?" George gasped. "You bet." "Awesome," Juliana continued. "My uncle gave me 4 tickets. Alex and Chris are coming too. We can pick up some great pointer watching the beavers." "Definitely," George said. He stopped. His stomach grumbled. "We can pick up some hot dogs and popcorn too." "Yep," Juliana said with a laugh. "See you tonight." "The seats are all the way at the top," Juliana said as she, Alex, Chris, and George entered the stadium. Juliana's mom had dropped them off and was going to pick them up after the game, but they're right behind home plate, so we can see the whole field. And anything we can't see, we can catch on the Jumbotron. George pointed to the giant screen high above the field. "Weirdo warning!" "There's a weirdo in the ballpark." Suddenly, George heard Lolly shouting behind him. He turned around. Lolly and his older brother Sam were sitting in box seats just 2 rows from the field. "Where are you guys going?" Lolly asked George and his friend. "To our seats," Alex pointed up toward the top of the stadium. "Oh, you're in the nosebleed section," Lolly said with a laugh. "Nosebleed section?" George pictured a bunch of people with bloody noses all sitting together and watching the game as rivers of slimy red blood flowed down on to Lolly and his brother. Cool. See you later, Lolly, Juliana said as she climbed the stairs. George, Alex, and Chris followed her. Well, George and Alex did anyway. Chris was so busy drawing something on his sketch pads that he turned the wrong way. Bam! Chris slammed right into a pole. Excuse me, Mama, he said, without even bothering to look up from his drawing. What's with Chris? George asked Alex. He's sketching some ideas for his art and project, Alex explained. George watched as Chris tripped going up the stairs. He gets this way every year. The art show, Juliana said. The show is this Thursday. He's only going to get worse. Chris bumped into the knee of a huge guy sitting in an aisle seat. The guy's soda spilled on its Beaver's t-shirt. Hey, watch where you're going, kid, the guy said, looking down at the yucky brown soda stain that was spreading across the front of the t-shirt. Sorry, Chris mumbled as he kept drawing and walking. George shook his head. Chris was going to get worse. How was that even possible? Yes, Alex exclaimed a few minutes later as the kids took their seats. And waited for the game to begin. He reached under his chair and pulled up a big glob of gray-green gum. This nosebleed section is a gold mine for already been chewed gum. This is the fourth piece I found. Awesome, George said. You're 4 pieces closer to getting in the Skimmies Book of World Records for the world biggest ABC gum ball. He pulled up a piece of gum from his mouth and handed it to Alex. Take this one, too. The flavor all gone anyway. Whoa, thanks, Alex said, sticking the gum onto the giant ABC gum ball he carried around in his backpack. Peanuts, popcorn, get your snacks here. George looked up a guy in a red and white striped jacket and Beaver's baseball cap walked down the aisle with a tray of snacks. That's what I'm talking about, he shouted, waving his hand. I'll have a popcorn. The popcorn vendor raced over. He took George's money and handed him a red and white striped box. Juliana shot George a look. Remember why we're here? She said. We're trying to pick up pointers that will make us better players. Don't you want to win that championship? Yeah, but no one says I can't eat popcorn while I'm watching. George tossed piece of a popcorn into the air and caught it in his mouth. Good one, dude, Alex complimented him. Chris didn't say anything. He was too busy drawing to notice. You guys, the game is starting, Juliana pointed toward the field. Am I the only one here who thinks winning is important? George shook his head. They all wanted to win. It was just that nobody thought it was as important as Juliana did. Whoa, that was some pitch, Juliana cheered as he watched the ball go over the plate. Did you see how the catcher jumped up to throw it back after he caught it? George, that keeps him from making any wild throws. George didn't answer. Come on, George, focus, Juliana insists. George wanted to focus on what was happening down on the baseball field, but that was impossible because right then the only thing George could focus on was what was going on inside his belly. There were a whole lots of bubbles bouncing around in there, and that could only mean one thing. The super burp was back. Bing, bong, ping, pong. Already the bubbles were kickboxing his kidneys and spinning on his spleen. Ping, pong, bing, bong. George tried to give Alex their secret signal. Whenever George rubbed his head and patted his stomach, Alex was supposed to pull him away before the burp could make him do something stupid in front of a bunch of people. Rub, rub, pat, pat. But Alex was busy looking under his seat for more ABC gum. He didn't see that George was giving him their signal. Zing, zoom, bing, boom. The bubbles were ricocheted off George's ribs. They danced on his tongue, and then, burp! George let out a grand slam of a burp. It was so loud that it actually made Chris look up from his sketch pad. Awesome, Chris explained. But George didn't think it was awesome. He thought it was awful. George opened his mouth to say, "Excuse me," but that's not what came out. Instead, George's mouth started singing. Take me out to the ball game. Take me out with the crowd. Buy me some peanut and cracker jack. Do no! Alex shouted. The next thing George knew, his legs leaped up out of his seat. His feet ran over to the guy selling snacks. His hands grabbed some of the boxes. Peanuts, popcorn, cracker jack, George's mouse shouted out. Hey, that's my job, the vendor shouted. Give me back those snacks. George wanted to give the guy back his snacks. He wanted his feet to walk back to his seat. And he wanted his rear end to sit down. The only trouble was George wasn't in charge anymore. The super burp was. Let me root for the home team, George Mouse sang out. His feet danced up and down the aisles. His hand juggled box of peanut, popcorn, and cracker jacks. Unfortunately, George wasn't a very good juggler. Box of snacks went flying over the place. The snacks vendor ran around trying to catch them. A stadium guard raced to the nosebleed section. Cut it out, kid, he shouted. Sit down and give back those snacks. But the super burp didn't want to give back any snacks, and it sure didn't want to sit down. Burps aren't very good sitters. The guard grabbed for George. George darted out of the way. The guard fell into the lap of a woman in a Beaverbrook baseball cap. What are you doing? The woman demanded. Somebody catch that kid, the guard shouted. If they don't win, it's a shame. George sang out. By now, the whole stadium was singing with him. For it, 1, 2, 3, strike! Check it out! George is on the Jumbotron, Chris cheered. He pointed to the giant screen. Pop! Just then, George felt the air rush right out of him. It was like someone had popped a balloon in his belly. The super burp was gone, but George was still there, in the middle of the stadium, surrounded by a box of snacks, and it was all up there on the Jumbotron for everyone to see. The guard glared at George. Well, kid, he said, what do you have to say for yourself? George opened his mouth to say, I'm sorry, and that's exactly what came out. The guard grabbed George by the arm and started pulling him out of the stadium. I'm calling your parents to pick you up. You're out of here, he said. George figured that was what was going to happen. It was the same thing every time. The burp had all the fun, and George got in all the trouble. Bubble trouble, the worst kind there was.